The production floor went dead silent. That's when you know something's really wrong in manufacturing. I stood there watching 295 workers just stop what they were doing, staring at screens that wouldn't respond, machines that wouldn't start their next cycle. The night supervisor jogged over, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. "Walt, the whole system's locked up. Nobody can access anything. Production lines down, quality controls down, even basic inventory tracking." He paused, catching his breath. What the hell happened? I knew exactly what happened. "My name's Walter Gibson. I'm 51, and I've been working this plant for 21 years. Started as a floor engineer, worked my way up to senior operations manager. Yesterday morning, they locked me out of my own systems. Today, they're learning what that actually means. Let me back up. 18 months ago, our parent company dropped a $3.4 million efficiency overhaul project in my lap. Plant productivity was down 15%. Waste was up 20%. And corporate was making noises about shutting us down if we couldn't turn it around. They gave me full authority to redesign everything. Workflow, equipment placement, quality protocols, the works. I didn't just reorganize the floor. I rebuilt it from the ground up. Studied every bottleneck, every wasted motion, every inefficient handoff. Spent nights here with stopwatches and clipboards, mapping material flows like battle plans. The algorithms I developed weren't just spreadsheet formulas. They were 21 years of knowing exactly how this place actually worked. The first thing I did was walk every inch of this floor with the workers themselves. Not the supervisors, not the team leads, but the people who actually touch the product 8 hours a day. Danny Rodriguez from Station 12 showed me how the conveyor system created a 52-second delay every cycle because parts came in at the wrong angle. Linda Martinez from Quality Control explained why the inspection sequence was backwards, catching problems that should have been prevented 3 stations earlier. Nobody had ever asked them before. I spent 2 months just listening, learning that the official process documentation hadn't been updated in 7 years. Discovering that half our efficiency problems came from workers, creating workarounds to fix design flaws that management didn't know existed. These people weren't just following procedures. They were actively preventing disasters every single day, and getting no credit for it. The redesign took 10 months to implement. We didn't shut down production. Instead, I created a rolling upgrade system, optimizing one section at a time while the rest kept running. Every change got tested by the people who'd have to use it. Every improvement was explained to the workers before implementation, not after. The resistance came from middle management, not the floor. Supervisors worried that empowering workers would make them irrelevant. Department heads complained that the new protocols required them to actually understand the processes they managed. The old system let them manage by metrics and reports. The new system required them to manage by walking around and talking to people. But the numbers don't lie. Within 8 months, productivity was up 26%. Waste was down 31%. Worker injuries dropped 38% because the new layouts made sense instead of just looking good on paper. More importantly, people started caring about their work again. When you ask someone for their expertise and then actually use it, they become invested in the results. Corporate noticed. Other plants started asking for my protocols. I got invited to speak at manufacturing conferences. Industry publications wanted to feature our turnaround. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was building something that would last, something that mattered beyond this quarter's numbers. That's when Zachary Palmer showed up. Fresh MBA from Wharton, 29 years old, hired as project director to oversee the final implementation phase. Corporate's idea of adding strategic oversight to my project. Zach had all the buzzwords: digital transformation, data-driven optimization, synergistic workflows. He also had the new CFO's ear, a woman who'd been brought in 9 months earlier to modernize our operational approach. The CFO, Jennifer Foster, came from the tech sector. She believed that manufacturing was just another software problem waiting to be solved with the right algorithms and dashboards. She'd never worked a factory floor, never dealt with the reality of managing 295 people who show up at 6 a.m. regardless of whether the systems are working. To her, Zach represented the future, young, educated, fluent in the language of modern business. I represented the past, old-school experience in a world that supposedly didn't need that anymore. Zach started attending my meetings, asking to review my documentation, wanting copies of everything. Just getting up to speed, he'd say. Want to understand the full scope so I can support you better. He was polite, enthusiastic, full of praise for what I'd accomplished. I figured having management backing couldn't hurt. The project was working. Numbers don't lie, and I had nothing to hide. That was my first mistake. Zach was smart. I'll give him that. He didn't attack my results directly. Instead, he started questioning my methods. In meetings, he'd mention industry best practices that supposedly showed better approaches. He'd bring up articles about legacy thinking, holding back manufacturing innovation, always framed as constructive suggestions, never direct criticism. But I started noticing the pattern. Every suggestion involved replacing human judgment with automated systems. Every improvement meant fewer workers making decisions and more algorithms making them instead. Zach wasn't interested in optimizing what we'd built. He was interested in replacing it with something that didn't require people like me to understand it. Foster loved every word. Here's this young guy with fresh ideas talking about taking our improvements to the next level. Meanwhile, I'm the old-timer who's resistant to new approaches. Zach made sure to position himself as the bridge between my valuable experience and cutting-edge methodology. What really got to me wasn't the corporate politics. I'd dealt with that for 21 years. What bothered me was watching Zach miss the point entirely. He'd walk the floor with his tablet, taking notes about optimization opportunities, but he never actually talked to the workers. When Danny Rodriguez tried to explain why a particular sequence mattered, Zach would nod politely and then suggest we leverage automation to eliminate the human variable entirely. He didn't understand that the human variable wasn't a bug in the system. It was the feature that made everything else work. 3 months before the final rollout, Zach requested access to my core algorithms. The board wants to understand the technical foundation, he explained. They need confidence that our approach is scalable to other facilities. Made sense. I gave him read-only access to the systems. I should have paid more attention to what he was actually doing with that access. Zach wasn't just reviewing my work. He was studying it like someone preparing to recreate it. He'd spend hours in the system, not just reading the algorithms, but tracing through every decision tree, every conditional statement, every exception handler I'd built in. When I asked about his progress, he'd mentioned being impressed by the sophistication and wanting to fully understand the architecture. 2 weeks later, he was back asking for editing privileges. Found some potential optimization opportunities, he said. Minor adjustments that could boost our results by another 12%. He had a presentation ready, full of charts showing projected improvements that looked impressive on paper. I should have said no, should have asked to see his analysis first, demanded to understand exactly what he wanted to change and why, but the numbers were already so good, and 12% more would make this project legendary. Plus, Zach had Foster's backing and Foster controlled the budget for next year's expansion. I gave him the access. That's when things started going sideways. But so gradually I didn't notice at first. Zach began showing up for early morning system reviews that I wasn't invited to. He'd schedule meetings with department heads without looping me in. When I asked about it, he'd say he was gathering stakeholder input to ensure smooth change management. The language started changing too. In meetings, people stopped talking about Walt's system and started referring to the operational framework. My algorithms became the optimization protocols. The relationships I'd built with workers became stakeholder engagement initiatives. Everything was getting rebranded with corporate speak that made it sound like anyone could have done it. Linda Martinez, our plant supervisor, pulled me aside one Tuesday. Linda's been here 18 years, worked her way up from the line to supervision through pure competence. She knows every worker by name, understands every process intimately, and doesn't waste time on politics. Walt, something's off. Zach's been asking questions about your algorithms, but not normal questions. He wants to know what happens if certain protocols get modified. Keeps pushing scenarios where the systems might fail. She lowered her voice. He's also been talking to people about sustainable leadership transition and knowledge transfer protocols. That phrase hit me wrong. Knowledge transfer usually means one thing in corporate America. They're getting ready to fire someone and want to make sure their work can continue without them. What kind of scenarios is he asking about? Peak production periods, system overloads? What happens if the worker feedback loops get disabled? What happens if the algorithms run without the human oversight components? Linda paused. Walt, those aren't optimization questions. Those are sabotage questions. That night I stayed late to check the system logs. What I found made my stomach drop. Zach had been making changes. Small ones, buried deep in complex subroutines, but changes nonetheless. He'd modified error handling protocols, adjusted timing sequences, and altered the feedback mechanisms that allowed workers to signal problems before they became critical. When I ran projections on his modifications, they didn't improve anything. If anything, they introduced potential failure points. The changes were subtle but systematic, designed to create exactly the kind of cascading failures that would make the whole system look unstable under stress. I confronted him the next morning. "Zach, I noticed some alterations to the core protocols. Can you walk me through the reasoning?" He didn't miss a beat. "Just some minor calibrations based on the latest performance data. Nothing that changes your fundamental approach, just optimizing the execution." He pulled up a presentation I'd never seen. "I've been tracking some metrics that suggest we can push efficiency gains even higher." The presentation was impressive. Charts, graphs, projections showing 40% improvement over baseline. Problem was, the data didn't match what I was seeing on the floor. Some of the metrics he was citing didn't even exist in our tracking systems. Others were extrapolated from single data points or based on theoretical maximums that ignored real-world constraints. Where did these numbers come from? Predictive modeling based on industry benchmarks and system capacity analysis. Zach clicked through slides with the confidence of someone who'd never had to explain a production line failure to 295 angry workers. "The algorithms show significant headroom for improvement if we can eliminate some of the current bottlenecks." By bottlenecks, he meant the safety protocols and human oversight systems that prevented disasters. That's when I realized what was happening. Zach wasn't trying to improve my project. He was setting it up to fail in a way that would make his solution look necessary. His modifications would cause system conflicts during peak production periods, create bottlenecks that would look like design flaws, generate false error reports that would make the whole thing seem unstable. When the project crashed, he'd be there with his improved version, ready to save the day with a fully automated system that didn't require people like me to understand it. Foster would get her modern technology-driven solution. Zach would get his promotion. And I'd be the old-timer whose outdated approach couldn't handle the demands of modern manufacturing. The clever part was that I'd given him everything he needed. The system access, the technical documentation, even the credibility that came from working under my authority. He'd studied my work just long enough to know where to break it. I started building my defense that same night. First thing was backing up all my original algorithms to a personal server, complete with timestamps and change logs that would prove what I'd built versus what Zach had modified. Then I started having quiet conversations with key people about what they'd observed. Carl Johnson, our head of maintenance, confirmed what I suspected. Zach's been asking about equipment tolerance limits. What happens if systems get pushed beyond design specs? Says he needs to understand failure modes for risk management. Carl paused, adjusting his work gloves. But Walt, those aren't risk management questions. Those are sabotage questions. He wants to know exactly how much stress it takes to break something. Nancy Powell from the union had her own concerns. He's been inquiring about grievance procedures, asking how quickly we can replace workers if there are performance issues during the transition. Talking about bringing in temporary contractors who are more adaptable to new systems. Nancy's been fighting for workers here longer than I've been in management. She understands power and how it really works. Walt, he's planning to blame the workers when his changes fail. Steve Murphy, who runs our equipment maintenance contracts, had the most damaging information. Zach contacted me directly about modifying some of the safety protocols in our service agreements. Wanted to know if we could streamline some of the redundancy systems to improve efficiency. I told him any changes had to go through you first. Steve and I go back 13 years. His company services half the plants in the region. He didn't like that answer. Started asking about replacing our maintenance contract with a company that would be more flexible about safety standards. The picture was getting clearer. Zach wasn't just planning to sabotage my algorithms. He was systematically removing every safety net, every human oversight system, every relationship-based quality control that made the operation actually work. When the inevitable failures happened, he'd blame outdated systems, resistant workers, and unrealistic safety requirements. Then he'd implement his solution, a fully automated system with minimal human input, streamlined safety protocols, and maintenance contracts that prioritized cost over reliability. It would look great in quarterly reports right up until someone got seriously hurt or the plant had a catastrophic failure. 1 week before the final rollout, I got called into a board meeting. The CFO was there along with Zach and 2 executives I didn't recognize from corporate. They had charts and presentations ready, which told me this wasn't going to be a discussion. "Walt, we appreciate everything you've built here," Foster started. The improvements have been significant. However, we've identified some concerns about the sustainability of your approach. Zach took over, clicking to his first slide. The systems Walt designed work, but they're essentially black boxes. If something goes wrong, only he can fix them. That creates unacceptable risk for a multi-million-dollar operation. We need more transparent, standardized protocols. He walked through his presentation methodically, charts showing my algorithms as overly complex. Graphs demonstrating how my approach created dangerous single points of failure. Risk assessments that painted my reliance on worker feedback as subjective decision-making that compromises consistency. Every concern they raised was manufactured. Every risk they identified was created by Zach's modifications, but they had corporate buzzwords, colorful charts, and the confidence that comes from never having to explain a production failure to real people. We think it's best if I take operational control for the final implementation phase, Zach concluded. Walt can stay involved in a consulting capacity, but we need someone with fresh eyes managing the day-to-day execution. I sat there watching my own project get stolen in real time. The two corporate executives nodded along like they understood what they were voting on. Foster looked relieved to finally have someone speaking her language. Zach looked confident, professional, ready to take charge. "What exactly are you planning to change?" I asked. "Nothing fundamental," Zach assured me. "Just some efficiency optimizations and risk mitigation protocols. The core of what you built remains intact." That was a lie, and we both knew it. But the decision was already made. They handed me a revised org chart with Zach as lead operations director and my name moved to senior technical advisor. Consulting role, no system access, no direct authority, just valuable input when requested. I should have fought harder right then. Should have demanded they examine Zach's modifications, called out the manufactured data, insisted on a technical review by people who actually understood manufacturing. But I was tired. 18 months of 16-hour days, of caring more about this place than anyone else in that room, of being the only person who seemed to understand that 295 jobs depended on getting this right. Part of me wanted to let someone else carry the weight for once. That was my second mistake. They locked me out that afternoon. Security badge deactivated, system account suspended, even my parking spot reassigned. Temporary measure, they said, just while we transition operational authority. Zach walked me to my car, all fake sympathy and professional courtesy. "Don't take this personally, Walt. Your work here has been incredible. We just need to ensure continuity going forward." He paused at my driver's door. "Get some rest." "You've earned it." I drove home and spent the evening staring at my backup servers, looking at 18 months of work that was about to get twisted into someone else's victory. But as I sat there, something shifted in my thinking. They could lock me out of the office, but they couldn't lock me out of the relationships I'd built. The trust I'd earned with workers, vendors, and union representatives didn't get transferred just because they changed my title on an org chart. That's when I started making calls. First call was to Linda. "They locked me out," I told her. "Zach's running the show now." Her response was immediate. "That's insane. He doesn't know half of what you built. Hell, he doesn't know a quarter of it. Doesn't matter. He's got corporate backing and a fancy presentation." "Walt, listen to me. This place runs on relationships, not presentations. People trust you. They don't know Zach from Adam, and they sure don't trust him with their livelihoods." Second call was to Nancy. "They can lock you out of the office," she said. "They can't lock you out of people's trust. You know what happens when Zach's modifications start causing problems. People are going to call you, not him. And when they do, we'll be ready." The third call was to Steve. "They've got a new guy running my project now. Zachary Palmer. He might be calling about equipment modifications. You recommending him? I'm not recommending anything. Just letting you know there's been a change in management." Steve understood immediately. "In our business, personal recommendations matter more than corporate org charts. Trust gets earned over years and lost in minutes. Zach might have Foster's authority, but he didn't have anyone's confidence. That was yesterday. Today, the whole plant ground to a halt because Zach's modifications created exactly the system failures I knew they would. The overnight production run hit the first cascade failure at 3:47 a.m. By morning shift, nothing worked. I stayed home, let my phone go to voicemail. Zach called 7 times. Foster called 5 times. Corporate called 3 times. Linda called once with a status update, and I took that one. "It's a complete mess," she said. Zach's running around with printouts trying to figure out why the systems are rejecting the production schedules. The modified protocols are conflicting with the equipment firmware. Workers are standing around getting paid to do nothing because nobody can tell them what to do. What's Zach saying? That it's a temporary integration issue that will be resolved shortly. Problem is, his modifications broke the diagnostic routines too. The system can't even tell us what's wrong, let alone how to fix it. Linda paused. Walt, people are scared. They're asking if the plant's going to shut down, if they should be looking for other jobs. I hung up and drove to the diner across from the plant. Same booth by the window where I used to eat lunch during the construction phase. Perfect view of the main entrance and the loading docks. By 10 a.m., it was chaos. Delivery trucks backed up down the street because receiving couldn't process incoming materials. Finished goods sitting on the loading dock because shipping couldn't access the inventory database. The overnight supervisor was out in the parking lot chain smoking and talking on his phone, probably explaining to his wife why he might be late getting home. Workers were gathering in small groups near the employee entrance. Some were checking their phones, others were just talking quietly. I recognized most of them. Danny Rodriguez from Station 12, looking worried. Linda Martinez from Quality Control shaking her head at whatever someone was telling her. These weren't just employees to me. They were people I'd worked with for years. People whose expertise had made my project possible. My phone buzzed. Text from Carl. Zach is asking if you left any hidden documentation that might explain the system failures. I told him I'd pass along the message. Another text. This one from Nancy. Workers are asking if you're coming back. They want to know if they should be worried about their jobs. And then the call I was waiting for. Foster, sounding nothing like the confident executive from yesterday's meeting. Walt, we need to talk. There are some technical issues with the rollout that require your input. I'm not involved in operations anymore. Remember? This is temporary, just until we stabilize the systems. What systems? I don't have access to any systems. A pause. In the background, I could hear alarms shouting the sound of expensive machinery sitting idle. We can restore your access temporarily. Emergency authorization. I let that sit for a moment. What kind of emergency? Production's been down for 11 hours. We're losing $75,000 per hour in missed deliveries. Zach says the issues are related to some legacy protocols that weren't properly documented. Legacy protocols. That's what they were calling my work now. Zach made modifications to the core algorithms without understanding the interdependencies. The failures aren't bugs. They're features of his changes. Another pause. Can you fix it? That was the question I'd been waiting for. Not will you help us, not what would you recommend, but can you fix it? Because they already knew that I was the only one who could, maybe. I'd need full system access, operational authority, and a written guarantee that no one makes changes without my approval. Done. How quickly can you be here? I'm not sure I want to be there. Zach's got this handled, right? Fresh eyes, modern approach, all those industry best practices. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear background noise from the plant floor. More alarms, someone shouting instructions that nobody was following. Walt, please, just get here. I finished my coffee and drove across the street. The security guard who'd been instructed to keep me out yesterday waved me through without checking my badge. Funny how emergencies clarify priorities. Zach was waiting in the lobby, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His presentation folder was tucked under his arm, but nobody was asking for charts and graphs anymore. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there were actual sweat stains under his arms. This wasn't the confident MBA from yesterday's meeting. Thank God you're here. I think there might be some compatibility issues between your original design and some minor optimizations we implemented. Minor optimizations. I almost smiled. What exactly did you change? For the next hour, I walked him through every modification, explaining how each one created cascading failures throughout the system. The worst part, he genuinely didn't understand what he'd done wrong. Zach understood business theory, but he didn't understand manufacturing reality. He treated the plant like a computer program that could be optimized with better code, not realizing that manufacturing is a complex system where human judgment prevents disasters. But the models showed 12% improvement. He kept saying, like reality should conform to his spreadsheets. Your models didn't account for the safety interlocks, worker feedback loops, or equipment tolerance variations. You optimized for theoretical efficiency and eliminated practical functionality. Watching him realize that his MBA didn't prepare him for this was almost satisfying. Almost. The fixes took 14 hours to implement properly. Not because they were complicated, but because I had to undo all of Zach's improvements while explaining to him why each change was necessary. He took notes like a graduate student, asking questions that showed he'd never really understood what I'd built. By evening shift, production was back online. By the end of the week, we were running better than we had before Zach's modifications. The workers relaxed, the supervisors stopped looking stressed, and the loading docks returned to their normal organized chaos. The board meeting happened the following Tuesday. Different tone this time. The two corporate executives who'd nodded along with Zach's presentation were notably absent. Foster started with an apology and ended with an offer. VP of Operations, 32% salary increase, direct report to corporate, and a seat on the Strategic Planning Committee. But the sweetest part was watching Zach during that meeting. When Foster announced my promotion, his face went through every stage of grief in about 30 seconds. First confusion, then realization, then the slow burn of understanding that his career trajectory had just hit a brick wall. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see his hands shaking as he flipped through his now useless presentation notes. And Zach, Foster continued, will be reassigned to junior operations analyst, reporting directly to Walt. Learning opportunity, we're calling it. A chance to understand manufacturing from the ground up. I watched him swallow hard, reporting to Walt. That's right, Walt's going to teach you what those algorithms actually do, how they connect to real people doing real work. Consider it your graduate education in manufacturing. I accepted both offers, of course. For the next 8 months, Zach worked under my supervision, learning what manufacturing actually involves. Not the theory from business school, but the reality of managing 295 people, $60 million in equipment, and production schedules that don't care about your PowerPoint presentations. Watching him struggle with basic concepts was educational. Turns out, when you remove the buzzwords and force someone to explain how things actually work, you discover what they really know. Zach knew plenty about theoretical optimization, but nothing about the human systems that make manufacturing possible. The first time I sent him to investigate a quality control issue, he came back with a 20-slide presentation about systematic process improvement opportunities. When I asked him what the workers on the line actually said, he admitted he hadn't talked to them. Zach, go back. Stand next to Maria Santos for 2 hours. Watch what she does. Ask her why she does it that way. Then come tell me what you learned. He spent the next week doing exactly that, station by station, learning what I'd learned 18 months earlier. The people who do the work know more about the work than anyone else. By month 6, something interesting happened. Zach stopped trying to impress everyone and started trying to understand everything. He began asking better questions. Instead of how can we automate this, he'd ask why does this step matter? Instead of talking about eliminating human variables, he'd talk about supporting human expertise. The plant's running at 134% of baseline efficiency now. Corporates using our protocols at 4 other facilities. I've got budget authority for a $500 million expansion that'll add 95 jobs and increase our capacity by 42%. But the real victory came last month. Pentagon called. They want our protocols for a defense contractor project worth $50 million. Government efficiency standards, they said, need systems that balance automation with human oversight for critical manufacturing. The meeting was in D.C. Foster, myself, and Zach flew out together. Room full of colonels, procurement officers, and defense contractors. I spent 3 hours explaining our approach, how we integrated worker expertise with algorithmic efficiency, how human judgment prevents the kind of cascading failures that pure automation creates. Zach sat through that whole presentation taking notes, real notes, not the performative kind he used to take. When one of the colonels asked about scalability, Zach actually gave a good answer about the importance of adapting protocols to local workforce expertise rather than imposing standardized solutions. On the flight back, he looked at me and said, I finally get it, Walt. This isn't just about algorithms, it's about people. I handed him the rental car keys at the airport. Your turn to drive back, I've got calls to make. That's when you know you've really won. Not when someone gets fired or humiliated, but when they become better at their job because they had to learn from their mistakes. People ask if I regret not just walking away, letting Zach's incompetence destroy everything and proving my point. But here's what I learned. The best revenge isn't watching someone fail, It's being so essential that their failure becomes impossible to ignore. Then, using that leverage to build something better. They didn't just lock me out of my project. They locked themselves out of competence. When I came back, it wasn't as the guy who saved the day. It was as the guy they couldn't afford to lose again. That's the kind of victory that lasts. In the end, they thought they were replacing me with someone cheaper and more compliant. What they actually did was replace competence with ambition and discover that ambition without knowledge is just expensive ignorance. The real lesson isn't about workplace politics or corporate betrayal. It's that true expertise can't be stolen, only earned. And when you try to shortcut that process, reality has a way of demanding payment with interest. These days, when young MBAs show up talking about disrupting everything, I smile and hand them a clipboard. Great, I tell them. Start by spending a week with our best workers. Learn what they know. Then we'll talk about improvements. Most of them think I'm being difficult. A few realize I'm giving them the best career advice they'll ever get. And Zach, he's actually turned into a decent operations manager. Still reports to me, but now it's because he wants to learn, not because he has to. Funny how that works out. Sometimes the best revenge is just being right all along. Respect isn't given to the loudest voice in the room. It's earned by the person who solves the problem when everyone else is standing around with their hands in their pockets. You can steal someone's title and take their office, but you can't download 21 years of knowing exactly what breaks at 3 a.m. and how to fix it before the morning shift shows up.